Waitress spoke sign. Language 2. Billionaire's deaf mom. Exposed a dark secret. In a five-star restaurant in Manhattan, a glass of red wine was thrown into an old woman's face. Her silver hair turned scarlet as cruel laughter followed. She trembled, but she did not fight back. Do you know what Vanessa Cole spat at her? Old hag, stop waving your hands like a fool. Do you even belong here? The woman she humiliated wasn't just anyone. She was the mother of billionaire Alexander Blackwood. And yet, surrounded by wealth and privilege, no one moved. What would you have done in his place? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please subscribe to Emotional Echoes channel. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you the story. Le Jardin was the kind of restaurant where people whispered about money without saying a word. Chandeliers glowed above white tablecloths, and the hum of soft jazz filled the air. At a corner table, Margaret Blackwood sat waiting for her son. Her silver hair caught the light, her back straight with quiet dignity. She lifted her hands and signed to call for service, her movements graceful yet hesitant. Across the room, Vanessa Cole spotted her. Dressed in a designer gown, she leaned toward her friend Rachel Green, who was already smirking. Rachel muttered if the old woman was mocking them with strange hand signals. Vanessa tilted her glass, saying some people should know their place before stepping into a place like this. Their laughter cut through the room like glass. Margaret tried to smile, trembling, her hands folding into her lap as if to hide the only language she had. Sophia Martinez, a waitress balancing a tray, froze at the sound. She knew those signs. She had studied them once, in another life. Her chest tightened as she watched cruelty dressed up as casual amusement. Eyes from nearby tables turned toward the corner, sensing the tension rising, waiting to see if anyone would step in. Rachel walked past Margaret with a deliberate bump of her shoulder, sending the glass on the table wobbling dangerously. Margaret flinched and quickly signed an apology, her hands shaking as if she were the one at fault. Vanessa rolled her eyes with sharp impatience and, without warning, lifted her own glass of red wine and hurled it into Margaret's face. The crimson liquid streamed down her silver hair and elegant dress, staining everything with humiliation. Vanessa's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Old hag, stop waving your hands like a fool. Do you even belong in a place like this? Every fork froze midair, every whisper died instantly. All eyes locked on the scene, horror and disbelief painted across the faces of Manhattan's elite. Margaret sat frozen, trembling, the cruel laughter of Rachel echoing in her ears. Her lips quivered, trying to form a polite smile, but her eyes filled with tears. In that crushing silence, Sophia rushed forward, placing herself between Margaret and her attackers. "Ma'am, are you okay?" she whispered, then immediately moved her hands in fluent signs. "You are safe. I understand you." Margaret's chest heaved as sobs broke free, but her expression softened with relief. For the first time that evening, someone had truly spoken her language. Sophia wiped the dripping wine from Margaret's face with a napkin, steadying her hands. Then she turned slowly, her dark eyes blazing, to face Vanessa. "Respect is free," Sophia said, her voice firm and unwavering. "Maybe that is why you will never afford it." The words rang across the room, louder than any scream. Gasps escaped from the tables around them, and a wave of indignation spread through the diners. Vanessa's lips curled in rage, but she could not silence the sting of those words. The restaurant held its breath. Margaret's tears still glistened, Sophia's defiance still burned, and Vanessa's cruelty still hung heavy in the air. It was a moment no one in that room would forget. The heavy doors swung open, and Alexander Blackwood entered, his tall frame casting a shadow across the silent room. His eyes froze on the sight of his mother, her silver hair drenched in red wine, her body trembling as Sophia held her steady. For a long moment he could not breathe. Then his voice erupted, sharp and furious, demanding to know what had happened. Vanessa jumped to her feet, clutching her pearls as if she were the victim. Tears appeared instantly as she cried that Margaret had insulted them and that the waitress had joined in. Rachel nodded eagerly, adding that they had only defended themselves. Their performance was desperate, but polished, as if they expected everyone to believe them. Sophia stepped forward, her voice clear despite the fear tightening her chest. "Your mother did nothing wrong," she said firmly. "She only tried to order her meal. I saw everything." Her words cut through the lies like glass shattering, and the room seemed to lean closer, waiting for Alexander's response. Margaret lifted her hands, signing slowly as her eyes glistened. "Do not blame her. Thank this girl." The signs were shaky but clear, her gratitude shining through the humiliation. Sophia caught the message, and her throat tightened, tears threatening to spill. Alexander's gaze shifted from his mother's trembling hands to Sophia's face. For the first time, he did not see her as just another waitress in black uniform. He saw the woman who had understood his mother, the only one in this room who had stepped forward when others had looked away. His chest rose with anger and something deeper, a dawning respect he had not expected. The silence was heavy. Vanessa tried to reach for his arm, her voice trembling with false sweetness, begging him not to misunderstand. But Alexander's grey eyes were fixed on Sophia, and the room understood that the balance of power had shifted. Vanessa's mask of innocence cracked the moment she realized Alexander was not defending her. Her voice rose, sharp and shrill, as she turned on Sophia. She spat out that no waitress from the streets could ever stand on the same ground as people like them, that Sophia was nothing more than disposable help, pretending to matter. The words spread across the room like poison. Diners whispered, some shaking their heads in open disgust, others staring at Vanessa as if they had finally seen her true face. Even Rachel shifted uncomfortably, but Vanessa pressed on, her anger only fueled by humiliation. Sophia stood tall, her hands clenched, but her voice calm and steady. She said that the only person beneath others is the one who believes money grants them the right to humiliate. The words struck like lightning, and the silence that followed carried the weight of truth. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, her trembling fingers signing quiet gratitude toward Sophia. Alexander's face hardened, his jaw tight with fury. He looked directly at Vanessa, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. "You insulted my mother in front of the world. That is something I will never forgive." The diners gasped softly, their judgment of Vanessa now spoken aloud by the man she had been desperate to impress. Vanessa staggered back, color draining from her cheeks as she tried to cling to her composure. She stammered that it was all a misunderstanding, that she had only reacted because she felt provoked. But her words sounded hollow, drowned out by the disapproving murmurs filling the restaurant. Rachel tried to slip toward the exit, muttering about not wanting to be involved, but the restaurant manager blocked her path. His face was stern as he said that they would need to remain until security arrived. The humiliation spread wider, the whispers turning into open condemnation. In the middle of it all, Sophia stood unwavering, Alexander's eyes fixed on her with a new light of respect. The balance of the evening had shifted completely. Vanessa was left exposed. Margaret comforted at last, and Sophia revealed as the only one with dignity. After the chaos, Alexander guided his mother to a quiet table, and Sophia followed reluctantly. Margaret's breathing had steadied, her trembling hands now resting gently in her lap. Alexander leaned closer, his grey eyes narrowing as he studied Sophia's movements. "You sign like someone who has done this all her life," he said quietly. "Where did you learn?" Sophia looked down at the floor, her throat tightening. "Just something I picked up," she whispered. Margaret touched her wrist gently, then signed with deliberate firmness. "You studied this. Why hide?" Sophia froze. The words struck deep, her walls crumbled, and tears broke free. She admitted she had once studied linguistics at Columbia. She remembered standing on a stage in the university's great hall, lights blinding, a medal hanging from her neck as professors praised her brilliance. Her research in language and communication had been her pride, her future. Her voice cracked As she described the moment, it all collapsed. Daniel Chen, her partner on the project, had taken her work and claimed it as his own. He had promised to present it together, but when the night arrived, he walked onto the stage alone. The crowd applauded him as she stood frozen in the back, the recognition that should have been hers stolen in front of her eyes. Sophia pressed her palms together, as if trying to hold herself together. From that night, everything unraveled. Professors stopped calling her name. Opportunities vanished. Daniel became a rising star, while she was left with whispers of failure. She confessed she had hidden her degree, her skills, because every reminder of what she once was only deepened her shame. Alexander's jaw clenched as he listened, his eyes no longer cold, but filled with something heavier, almost protective. He leaned forward. "You survived betrayal and humiliation most people would never recover from. You have nothing to be ashamed of." Margaret reached across the table, her hands moving with tender clarity. "You are brave. You saved me tonight." Sophia wiped her tears, the words sinking into her heart. For years she had lived as if erased, invisible in the very city she once dreamed of conquering. Now, under the weight of truth, she felt a strange lightness. For the first time since that night at Columbia, she was no longer standing alone. That night, Sophia returned to her small apartment in Queens, the thin walls echoing with arguments from the neighbors. She kicked off her shoes and dropped onto the bed, her body heavy with exhaustion. After a long silence, she bent down and pulled out the metal box hidden under the frame. The lock clicked open. Inside lay her MBA diploma from Columbia, certificate still neat but yellowing at the edges, and the patent drafts she had once guarded with pride. She ran her fingers across them slowly, almost reverently, before pressing the papers to her chest. They felt like relics of a life stolen from her hands. Her vision blurred as the memory cut through. She saw herself on the stage at Columbia, medals shining, professors applauding. Then Daniel's voice, smooth and warm, promising partnership, promising forever. The image twisted into him, walking onto that same stage alone, the spotlight on him, the applause roaring, while she stood hidden in the shadows, erased. Her laptop blinked with a breaking news alert. Daniel Chen, CEO of Pinnacle, preparing a historic partnership with Blackwood Industries. His name burned across the screen, and her breath snapped short. The past had not only caught her, it was walking straight into her present. Sophia gasped, clutching her temples as panic surged. Her breaths came fast and shallow, her heart slamming against her ribs. "No," she whispered, rocking forward. "No, not again. I can't escape him." The words spilled out between sobs, a prayer, and a curse all at once. The apartment shrank around her, the shadows pressing closer, the air too thin to breathe. The document slipped from her lap onto the floor. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking. Fate was dragging Daniel back into her life, not by chance, but by design. And she knew, with terror clawing at her chest, that this time she could not run. The next morning, Alexander sat at the head of a glass conference table, the Manhattan skyline gleaming behind him. Across from him sat Daniel Chen, polished and confident, ready to finalize the deal that promised billions. His smile was steady, but his eyes flickered with ambition. Sophia entered quietly, her presence arranged by Alexander as a consultant. When Daniel saw her, his mask slipped for just a second. Shock flashed, then vanished behind a smirk. He leaned back in his chair with mocking ease. "I don't know this woman. She's unstable, desperate to attach herself to powerful men." Sophia's knees trembled, but she steadied herself. Her voice quivered, then grew firm. "You erased me once. You won't erase me again." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were patent drafts with her name, emails that carried her words, and photos of her and Daniel working late nights side by side. The proof was undeniable. Daniel scoffed, his jaw tightening. Anyone could forge this. She always wanted more credit than she deserved. His words were sharp, but his hands twitched, betraying the fear behind his performance. At that moment, The conference room doors swung open. Vanessa Cole strode in, her heels striking the marble like a declaration. She had heard whispers about Alexander's important meeting and insisted to the receptionist that she was entitled to be there. She wanted to prove her loyalty, to show Alexander that she belonged at his side. She rushed toward Daniel, placing a hand on his arm, as though she had always been his ally. Turning on Sophia, her voice dripped with venom. "Trash like you has no place in this room. Stop clinging to Alexander for attention. Daniel is the real visionary, and you are nothing." Sophia's breath caught, but before she could respond, another presence filled the room. Margaret entered quietly, her silver hair soft in the light, her steps calm but steady. Without hesitation, she raised her hands and signed. Truth always wins. Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she voiced the words aloud. The weight of the moment crashed down. Alexander pushed back his chair and rose to his full height, his voice like thunder. Enough. He slammed his palm against the table, the sound echoing like a gavel. "I will not allow anyone to insult my mother or the woman who defended her when no one else did." The room fell into stunned silence. Vanessa's bravado collapsed, her face pale as she realized Alexander's fury was aimed at her too. Daniel leaned forward, his smile twisting into a threat. "End this deal, and I'll ruin you, Blackwood. I have power you can't touch." Alexander's glare did not falter. He gestured to the evidence Sophia had laid out. "You don't have power. You have lies. And I will not build my empire on lies." The conference room felt like a courtroom. Every word, every glance weighed like testimony. Sophia stood tall despite her shaking hands, Margaret steady beside her, and Alexander's fury cutting through the air. In that high-rise office, the empire Daniel had built on deceit began to crumble, piece by piece, under the light of truth. Alexander stood very still, then spoke with cold finality. "The contract is cancelled," he said, "and I will open a full investigation into every transaction tied to these patents." His voice left no room for bargaining. Daniel's face flushed red with fury. He slammed his hand on the table and spat that Alexander would regret destroying him, that if he fell, he would pull everyone down with him. "I will drag you under with me." For a moment his words filled the room like thunder, but then they hit a wall of silence. The silence was worse than any rebuttal. People looked away from Daniel as if his threats made them dirty, not afraid. The evidence on the table sat like a jury verdict, its presence heavier than any of his bravado. Vanessa's skin turned the color of alarm as whispers rippled through the attendants. Her attempt to cling to Daniel had tied her to his collapse, and the same crowd that had once admired her now watched with thinly veiled contempt. She muttered excuses, tried to gather herself, but the manager's glance and the low murmurs made her hands tremble. Daniel's bravado crumbled into frantic bargaining. He named names, he promised checks and favors, he tried to weaponize deals, but his voice thinned with each failed attempt. No one moved to help him. Some executives quietly closed laptops, others exchanged restrained looks, the kind that say, "This is over." Sophia pressed her palms to her face and let the tears come without shame. 2 years of quiet fear unspooled into sobs that were not defeat but release, and each breath afterward felt lighter. Margaret reached for Sophia's hand and squeezed, the small gesture sealing the shift from victim to survivor. Outside the glass walls, the press had already smelled a story. Phones discreetly lit up as aides typed terse messages. Within hours, the news would ripple across the city. For now, the room watched Daniel shrink under the weight of his own lies, while Alexander's decision crystallized into action. When the meeting finally broke, Vanessa slipped out with her head bowed and the high heels of her reputation broken. Daniel left last, shoulders tight, muttering impotent threats that bounced off the indifference in the room. In that instant, the empire he had built on theft showed the first clear cracks, and the people who had suffered in silence began, quietly, to breathe. Months later, headlines filled the city with Daniel Chen's downfall. Fraud investigations stripped him of his company, his name dragged through courts and tabloids. The man who once stole Sophia's future had finally lost his own. In Brooklyn, a modest office glowed with new light. Sophia stopped at the door, her hands trembling as she traced the letters on the fresh nameplate. Martinez Innovations. Her heart thudded, her breath uneven, tears stinging as she whispered the words. For the first time in years, her name stood tall in a place of its own. Inside, the office was small, only a handful of desks and second-hand computers, but it felt like a kingdom. Early prototypes lined the tables, ideas once buried now alive again. Alexander visited often, not as a billionaire checking numbers, but as someone quietly making sure she had the support she needed. Margaret came too, her silver hair shining, her hands signing encouragement with warmth. Every Saturday, Margaret invited Sophia to the community center in Queens. Dozens of children with hearing loss gathered, their eyes lighting up as Sophia taught them sign language with patience and joy. Their laughter filled the halls, erasing the echoes of humiliation that had once haunted her. Life was far from perfect, but it no longer felt broken. Sophia was rebuilding, piece by piece, with people who saw her worth. What began with cruelty in a restaurant had transformed into a story of healing, dignity, and hope. The morning was quiet, sunlight spilling through tall windows, as Alexander looked at Sophia with uncharacteristic softness. He told her she had not only saved his mother, but had also saved him from a life built on lies. The words came slowly, heavy with truth, and they carried more weight than any deal he had ever signed. Sophia's lips curved into a gentle smile. She turned toward Margaret and signed the words with grace, her hands moving like poetry. Margaret's eyes lit up, her face glowing with pride as she reached out and blessed them both with a tender smile. Together, they stepped outside, the air fresh and light. This time, there was no shame, no cruelty, only respect. They walked side by side like a family reborn, carrying with them not wealth or power, but something greater. The story ended not with victory in business, but with healing, dignity, and love. Because money can buy attention, but only kindness and compassion make a person truly rich. From a single cruel moment in a glittering restaurant to the courage that rebuilt a broken life, this story showed how compassion can turn humiliation into healing. Sophia found her strength again. Alexander learned the true measure of loyalty, and Margaret reminded us that dignity has no price. In the end, family and kindness are the real wealth. If this story touched you, share your feelings in the comments, like and subscribe to Emotional Echoes so more hearts can be reached. Thanks for listening.